on the street, you dumbass. You thought you was
Whitney, go back!
What do you need help with?
Stop.
The night of January 17, 2025 began with a deceptive calm in the quiet college town of Normal, Illinois. Officers arrived at a residence just after midnight, responding to a call that would soon unravel into a chaotic display of family dysfunction and legal peril. The air inside the home was heavy with the stale scent of cigarettes and the sharp tang of old resentments. A woman named Whitney stood in her bedroom doorway using her finger to trace a handwritten ledger taped to the painted wood. She was desperate to prove her financial worth in a household she felt was crumbling around her. "You see that? That's rent, right? You see what I put?" Whitney asked the officers with a frantic intensity. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the glaze of intoxication. She moved her finger down the list of dates, demanding validation for every dollar she had contributed. "That shows January rent, right? December rent, right? November rent, right?" The officer standing nearest to her nodded professionally. "Yep," he replied simply. He was gathering facts and assessing the emotional temperature of the room. Whitney was not done. "I live here, right?" she asked. It was a rhetorical question born of deep insecurity. She turned her attention to the rest of the house where her mother and sisters waited. "Whatever the hell her daughters got going on with they weird asses, that's on them," Whitney declared. She gestured to the new hardware on her bedroom door. "I changed the locks on my door. Let me show you. I changed the locks on my door." This was her fortress against the people she called broke-ass relatives. To Whitney, this was a battle over finances and boundaries. She claimed to pay her share while her mother's account stayed in the negative. "I mind my own business," she insisted. "I don't ask them broke-ass expletive for expletive." The primary officer on the scene decided to divide the parties to get a clearer picture of the night's events. He stepped out to speak with Whitney's mother, leaving a younger officer named Tyler to wait with Whitney. This separation was a standard police tactic designed to de-escalate tension, but in this case it had the opposite effect. Whitney felt abandoned with a junior authority figure, and her agitation began to simmer. She paced the small room, muttering about the $750 she paid for her space. $750 for this expletive? At this point, she grumbled. The injustice of her situation was consuming her. Officer Tyler stood quietly, trying to remain unobtrusive. Whitney turned on him suddenly, demanding he look at the evidence of her innocence. "Show me that I touched somebody," she challenged. Her voice rose in pitch. "You don't want to go to Mad Girl." The threat hung in the air, a verbal warning shot. The officer kept his composure. "I didn't say you touched anybody," he assured her. Whitney was not listening to his words, but reacting to his presence. "Show me," she repeated. "Show me that I touched somebody." The young officer tried to explain that there was a video allegation, but he would not show it to her. The primary officer returned to the bedroom, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He had gathered enough information from the mother to suspect that alcohol was a major factor in the disturbance. He decided to conduct a field assessment of Whitney's condition. "How much you had to drink today?" he asked directly. Whitney scoffed at the question. "Nothing," she lied. The officer pressed on, testing her orientation to time and place. "Well, what town are you in right now?" he asked. "Normal," she answered correctly. "You know what day of the week it is?" "It's Thursday," she replied. Then came the question that shattered the fragile truce. "Who's the president?" the officer asked. For Whitney, this was not a medical assessment, but a personal insult. It was a challenge to her intelligence and her autonomy. "What the expletive?" she snapped. "You can't play with me." She launched into a confused political rant, mentioning both the current administration and the incoming transition. "But the Trump effing to take over," she shouted. The officer tried to pivot back to a simple cognitive test. "How many quarters make a dollar?" he asked. Whitney answered. 4, but her patience was gone. "Get the expletive away from me," she hissed. She took a step toward the officer, her body language shifting from defensive to aggressive. "Move, because you thought I was stupid." The officer explained he was just trying to determine how intoxicated she was. Whitney's denial of her condition turned into a direct threat. "I'm cool. Expletive. If you run up on me, I'll put you in your..." She let the sentence trail off, but the implication of violence was clear. The officers immediately recognized the escalation. This was no longer just a drunk woman arrested for being loud, it was a safety hazard. "Whitney, put your arms down," the officer commanded. "Do not bow up on her." Whitney had turned her aggression toward her sister, who was visible in the hallway. The family dynamic was a powder keg and Whitney was the spark. "You mad 'cause you stupid," she taunted her family. The officers realized they needed to contain her in the bedroom to prevent a physical assault. "Go back in your room," the officer ordered firmly. "Go back in your room so I can talk to you." Whitney refused to be corralled. "I'm not a little ass girl," she retorted. She squared her shoulders against the law enforcement officers, challenging their authority in her own home. The situation deteriorated rapidly as Whitney began to issue specific lethal threats. "You got one time to swing over at me," she warned the officers, "and I'm wet your ass out." In the lexicon of street violence, this phrase is often interpreted as a threat to shoot or kill. It is a grave statement to make to a uniformed police officer. The officers remained remarkably disciplined. They did not draw weapons or raise their voices. "Nobody's threatening you," the officer stated calmly. "I've been standing here in the same position this whole time." He held his hands open, demonstrating his lack of aggression. Whitney was operating in an alternate reality fueled by alcohol and rage. "I'ma expletive you up. I hope you know that," she promised. She looked past the officers to her family members. "I'ma body slam her and I'ma get your ass real bad." These were articulable threats of immediate physical harm. Under Illinois law, assault involves conduct that places another in reasonable apprehension of receiving a battery. Whitney was providing a textbook example of this offense. The officers, however, were still looking for a peaceful resolution. They did not want to take her to jail if they could avoid it. A plan was formed to have Whitney leave the premises for the night. Family members called for an Uber ride service, hoping to send her to a friend's house. The officers pivoted from enforcement to facilitation. "Hey, we got an Uber." "There's an Uber," the officer announced, trying to motivate her. "Your family's ordering an Uber, so the Uber will be on the way." For a brief moment, it seemed the Whitney drunk arrest might be averted. The officers encouraged her to pack a bag. "Just pack a bag. Make sure you get your stuff. You're all good," the officer said with a tone of encouragement. But the logistics of leaving proved too complex for Whitney's impaired state. She stumbled around the room, grabbing random items while continuing her verbal assault on her family. "I'ma beat the expletive out of this whole expletive crib," she muttered while searching for her cigarettes. The officers watched her closely, ensuring she did not grab a weapon. "They're in your pocket." "You grabbed them." "I watched you," the officer pointed out as she frantically searched for her tobacco. She was losing track of her belongings and her objective. Time was ticking away, and the patience of the Uber driver outside was likely wearing thin. The inevitable happened. The ride was canceled or the driver departed. "Well, the Uber's gone now," the officer informed her. "So you got to just go in your room. And now you got to stay here." The exit strategy had failed. The officers were back to square one, trying to keep separated parties apart in a small apartment. Whitney took this news as a fresh provocation. She stormed back toward the doorway, screaming at her mother. "You weird-ass, grown-ass woman," she yelled. "You pin your kids against each other." The volume of her voice and the ferocity of her anger filled the hallway. The officers had reached the limit of their discretion. The earlier allegations of domestic battery, combined with her current disorderly conduct and threats, made an arrest the only viable option to ensure safety. "Turn around," the officer said. It was a simple command that signaled the end of the negotiation. The click of the handcuffs was the definitive conclusion to the argument. Whitney was now a prisoner of the state. "You're under arrest for domestic battery," the officer explained. The transition from citizen to suspect triggered a new wave of resistance. Whitney refused to walk willingly. She dragged her feet and pulled away from the officers as they escorted her out of the apartment building. The cool night air did nothing to sober her up. They reached the patrol vehicle, and the real struggle began. "I can't get in the car," Whitney protested. She stiffened her body, making herself as rigid as a board. This is a common form of passive resistance, often seen in police bodycam drunk arrest videos. The officers tried to guide her into the back seat, but she planted her feet firmly on the pavement. "Put me in a car that I'm getting into," she demanded nonsensically. She was stalling, fighting for every inch of control she had left. The officers tried to leverage her into the seat, but she braced her legs against the doorframe. "Bend your knee," the officer instructed. "Bend your knee." Whitney looked him in the eye and delivered a blatant lie. "I can't, because it's broke." Moments before, she had been standing, walking, and attempting to fight. Now she claimed a catastrophic injury to avoid incarceration. The officers were not deterred. They continued to push, and Whitney lashed out. Her leg shot out, striking the officer. "You kicked me in the knee," the officer stated immediately. His voice was devoid of anger but heavy with legal consequence. "Under arrest for that. You have aggravated battery charges as well." In the state of Illinois, aggravated battery to a peace officer is a serious felony. By connecting her foot with the officer's uniform, Whitney had escalated her legal jeopardy from a misdemeanor to a charge that could carry a prison sentence of 3 to 7 years. The resistance continued despite the new charge. Whitney refused to pull her legs into the vehicle. The officers were forced to employ a tactical maneuver known as the seatbelt drag. One officer went to the other side of the car, opened the door, and pulled Whitney across the back seat by her upper body while the other officer fed her legs in. Even after she was inside, she refused to sit up, slumped over in a defiant posture. "You're 30 and you're acting like a child," the officer remarked. He was breathless from the exertion. "I'm older than this and I'm not acting like you are." The police patience drunk individuals encounter is often extensive but finite. These officers had spent over 20 minutes trying to reason with Whitney, trying to help her leave, and trying to keep her out of cuffs. She had met every attempt with hostility and threats. Now she sat in the back of the squad car claiming she was the victim. "I ain't do a expletive to nobody," she cried. "The house I live in, all the bills in." She was still arguing her case to an audience that was no longer listening. The legal system had taken over. This incident serves as a stark illustration of the legal statutes in Illinois regarding domestic disturbance and battery. Domestic battery under 720 ILCS 5/12-3.2 is a Class A misdemeanor. It involves causing bodily harm or making insulting contact with a family member. This was the initial charge based on the altercation with her sister. However, the intoxicated, threatening arrest behavior led to far worse consequences. Aggravated battery to a peace officer under Section 12-3.05 represents a significant escalation. The law protects officers performing their duties, and physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature is dealt with harshly. Furthermore, Whitney's actions at the car door constituted resisting or obstructing a peace officer under Section 31-1. This is a Class A misdemeanor that applies when a person knowingly resists the authorized acts of a peace officer. By bracing her legs, refusing to walk, and physically fighting the placement into the vehicle, she committed this offense multiple times. The accumulation of these charges creates a complex legal web that Whitney will have to navigate. Her defense attorney will face a mountain of objective evidence provided by the body camera footage, which captures every threat and every refusal to comply. The broader impact of such cases on the community is significant. Police resources were tied up for nearly an hour dealing with a single individual who refused to behave rationally. This diverts patrol units from other potential emergencies. Moreover, the trauma inflicted on the family members, including the mother and sister, is lasting. Domestic disturbances are rarely isolated incidents. They are often the eruption of long-standing systemic issues within a household. The drunk, belligerent woman seen in the video is a symptom of a fractured family dynamic exacerbated by substance abuse. There are critical lessons to be learned from this Whitney drunk arrest narrative. The first is the importance of compliance. When law enforcement officers arrive on a scene, their primary goal is to restore order. Arguments regarding guilt or innocence are for the courtroom, not the bedroom or the sidewalk. By fighting the process, Whitney stripped herself of any leverage she might have had. If she had simply gone to her room or taken the Uber, she likely would have slept in her own bed that night. Instead, she slept in a holding cell facing felony charges. Another lesson involves the legal concept of fighting words and threats. While freedom of speech is a protected right, true threats and words that incite violence are not. Telling a police officer, "I'm wet your ass out," is not protected speech. It is a criminal act in the context of an arrest. It provides officers with the probable cause they need to escalate their response. Civilians must understand that officers are trained to take all threats seriously. They do not assume a person is just talking, they assume the person intends to act. The final takeaway is the danger of intoxication as a legal aggravator. Voluntary intoxication is almost never a valid defense for criminal conduct. In fact, it often serves as evidence of recklessness. Whitney's inability to control her impulses due to alcohol did not excuse her actions. It explained them in a way that likely hurts her legal case. The drunk threatening police scenario is one where the suspect often feels justified in the moment, only to realize the gravity of their errors when sobriety returns. As the patrol car pulled away from the curb, the quiet returned to the neighborhood in Normal, Illinois. The rent ledger on the bedroom door remained a testament to a dispute that no longer mattered. Whitney's fight for financial recognition had ended in a total loss of freedom. She had paid her rent, but she had failed to pay respect to the boundaries of the law. The drunk woman arrested that night became another statistic in the sad and repetitive cycle of domestic discord, leaving behind a shattered family and a permanent criminal record. The video of the incident would remain as an objective witness to the choices made and the consequences that inevitably followed. The justice system would now take its course indifferent to her payments and focused solely on her actions.